Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and thank you for stopping by yet again. I'm going to do at least two videos because if I did it all in one video, it would just be too long. So we'll cut it up at least into two. I'll be answering some questions that have been asked or are occasionally asked to me. They're not a concern to me, so I haven't been too worried. It didn't seem to be a concern to others. But nonetheless, they do come in and I should be answered. And then some recent events, which you may have heard about through other news sources and wonder what was going on and so forth. So let's proceed. And this is the first one of the two. And I will, when the other one's done, I'll have a link to it in the description below in this one, and of course vice versa for the people who stumble into the second one. You never know where YouTube's going to send you, is what it boils down to. Okay. People have asked me in the past whether I have any business relationship with Jackie Lang of Panama Relocations Tours. And the answer is no. I don't have any financial or business arrangement at all. In the old days, people had conferences or tours or conference tours or whatever. Here, there were a lot of them in the early part of the century, and there was a big boom of Americans and Canadians coming down. They would charge $1,500 for a couple, or $1,000 for a single person to attend. And then, in addition, they had to pay for their own transportation down. They had to pay for their housing, their lodging here in Panama themselves. They had to pay for local transport. They had to cover all their own meals and all this stuff. The speakers who spoke to them very often paid for the opportunity to be the experts at that particular meeting. And it was not a bad thing. It's business. But the key is that they squeezed every imaginable penny out of it that they possibly could. And the tours tended to be short along the beach area and with a clear indication of selling. So, that's one way to approach it. I encourage most people just to come down, rent a car, and go off on their own because we hadn't lost any, and we haven't lost any since to that. But I know that for many people, this is the best way to get introduced. You feel most comfortable. You feel like you don't have to worry about anything. It's going to be taken care of for you. Well, we didn't have any of these, and then Jackie came in with this idea, and I got to see her activity in action. Now, the other conferences, I've been getting complaints from members. In fact, they'd write me after here and say, Bob, can we come visit you? And I'd see them and they'd say, we're sitting in that conference room, it's meaningless, so we're just going to rent a car and go off on our own. Okay, once people realize is how comfortable, how friendly people are, that tends to be less of a problem. But again, it is not what is best for some folks. And Jackie had that, and she did provide that. I spoke to some of her groups. As a rule, I did it freely because I wanted to do that. And I wanted to be encouraging to these people, individuals. But eventually, I spoke at other places too. I got to a point where I didn't really want to focus on this sort of speaking. And so I told her I'm sorry, but I'm going to be charging, and I do now. The only groups I do it freely with will be an educational institution. I haven't done that for a while, but I have done that. And otherwise, though, for commercial operations, I would charge something. I'm not interested in them, so I don't go out searching for them. But I have retained my friendship with Jackie. I get the occasional email or Facebook message or whatever. And she continues, as far as I know, to carry on and through the thick and thin, not only during COVID, but during her own experience with COVID, which was no fun at all. And yet she worked her way through it all. She's a good businesswoman, a good businesswoman indeed. Now, her tour is heavily based toward Boquete. And initially, they used to spend time in the city, but having a bus with 30, 40 people on it, trying to go down to Old Town area, everything, it was utter craziness. Streets are hard enough to get through, and we spent a lot. I would go down with them, to see it and everything else. And no, it just wasn't working very well. So she has now stops along the way and has different itineraries, I know, but her basically aimed toward the mountains in Chiriquí, Boquete, David, not in the mountains, but at least it's certainly in Chiriquí. Volcan, Puerto Mueles, and areas that interest her there. And I think that's wonderful. And a lot of other people think that's wonderful too. So, but it doesn't really provide anything here in the city. And now she does have occasional people, tour guides that you can pay and will take you and so on, which they do a good job. I know at least one of them, and he's very fine at what he does. But the key thing, insofar as I was concerned, was that this service was here for people who needed it, and I was happy to smile on it, so to speak. And each time I do a newsletter, Jackie writes and says, "May I share this with the people at my website?" And I say yes, because I know who she is and I trust her. I mean, the basic rule is, of course, is you just distribute it as a PDF, as opposed to never ever changing a word of it, of course. I have had people take my stuff and republish it under their name, and that was brought to a halt very quickly, let me tell you. But I also had others who put stuff up that I had written a long time ago about their project, which is quite positive, but it hadn't been there for quite a while, and I go up and there it is. Sounds like it's just been written yesterday, and it wasn't. It was like 8-9 years earlier, and I am annoyed with this project at the moment because I think they're doing some funny business with the people, and I'm writing to complain. So I go to the website, there I am. So that had to come down too, since they had not bothered to ask for my permission. I'm a little sensitive on this sort of stuff, and in Jackie's case, I would say you're welcome to, so do that. So that's it. That's it. Now, more importantly here, there are a couple of things that are piqued your interest. As you may have heard today, as a matter of fact, and the last couple of days really, the U.S. dollar has finally begun to relax. Now, I've got I'll show it to you here in a second. It's the dollar index, the XDY, and it shows a 35-year period. Now let's get it up. All right, now you'll see that it goes up, it goes down, it goes up, it goes down. It's been over 100 in the far right end there, and this is this high range. Now keep in mind that this is 35 years, and a single column is an entire year. So what looks like a dramatic drop actually took months, in some cases 2 or 3 years, to actually occur. So when it's over 100, the dollar is very, very, very strong. And that's when it's very difficult for people who don't have dollars to buy homes here, because it's going to make them so much more expensive if their currency is not strong against the dollar. And that's a real pain in the neck, needless to say. So the fact that the dollar is coming down is not at all a surprise. I mean, I've been watching currency markets and for all of my entire career, and this is normal. It will come down, it will take some time. Typically it goes down, it keeps going down, down, down. You get around 90 and you're in the mid-range, you get down to 80, you're at the beginning of the lower range, you fall into the 70s, as you can see. That's very low, and that usually some point so far, at that point, around 75, that's very low historically. And then it turns around and starts going up again. So you can get a sense of the movement of it. So at the moment, although it has fallen, it has fallen from extremely high levels. Now, excuse me, I get something to drink here. Love water, great stuff. Anyhow, the problem is it's not that cheap yet, but it's going in the right direction, and I'm pleased to see that from the perspective of our members and visitors and subscribers who suffered, who've seen the price of real estate here go way up because of the exchange factor. So took a break to get a little more water here, and I'm back. So I'm going to have a link below that shows this particular graph that you see, that you just saw, of the dollar's value, the index for the dollar. And you can keep an eye on it. It's updated all the time when the markets are alive, and it will. And you can know where it's headed and how far it's dropped and so forth. There's a lot of talk about this, and I always say to people, give it a little time here. The foreign exchange markets are huge and they're very complex. I'll leave it at that. Okay. Um, Anyhow, that's the US dollar. We have a very interesting situation. Which we really, well, anyhow, it's a good, in the long run, it's a good thing. President Martinelli, who was elected in 2009, has been accused of corruption when he was president, and his two sons were arrested. They were up in New York, and they were on trial. They were jailed and so forth, and they, for having received bribes, major big ones, from this Brazilian firm. Odebrecht has been involved in this sort of activity all over Latin America, but very much so here. That was not a good thing, as you might imagine. And their trial, the case is underway with this, has been for a while. I mean, it's very complex. But there's a lot of attention been given to it. As a result of his son's defense, though, attorney, he said, putting on the record, is that they were simply picking up the money for their father. He told them to do it. That's all. That they themselves are not active agents. Well, I didn't get them along too well, but they're out. And anyhow, this President Martinelli was declared persona non grata, as basically boils down to in the United States, because the U.S. has some very stringent rules on large, blatant corruption, as they see this to be. So they announced that he would no longer be eligible, or he or his family, for visas to the United States. And this is their right to do it, and it's Panama's right to do it too if they feel like it. But I mean, that's not the point in this case. It is, however, it was not a surprise so much. Well, it was a surprise. It's always a surprise when somebody else actually takes action, you know. But the whole subject had been under discussion for so long. And that just sort of became part of the background for that case. Now, just a matter of days ago, the Secretary of State in the U.S. declared that President Varela, who took office after President Martinelli and before our current president, President Cortizo, and also for the same reasons, same case, same situation, another president. So, excuse me for a second, I'll be right back. So he was now persona non grata here in the U.S. as well, and he is to be denied visas. Now, this is pretty heavy-duty stuff, but yeah, this is Panama, and Panamanians have been very upset about corruption for a long time. This is a major issue, which means this particular case was especially large, and there have been others that have come out. What you may not be aware of is that a lot of people who would never in the past expect to be put on trial were put on trial for corruption. They might have expected they would not be found guilty. There would be a technicality or something. They weren't, and they've been found guilty. And then some of them have appealed, and the appeal has been denied, and they've been jailed. And these are people from the elite, people who thought they were fairly safe. This is the impression you get from everything that goes on. That's how I'll put it. And there are very few tears are shed, but it's at that, in my experience. This is the sort of activity that goes on. It's not that you're going to be bothered by corruption when you're living here in Panama. You know, I haven't had a police officer come to me and ask for anything in a very long time. That was like years ago when they were paid crap, basically. So anyhow, it's just not an issue for most folks. You can get yourself into some sort of complex legal situation here if you really put your mind to it and you don't use a lawyer, but otherwise, nah. It's pretty calm. Now, these charges as such, thus, in Panama, where we're taking it very seriously and where a lot of activities are already underway, some of the people who have typically in the past been quite critical of the U.S. taking a direct and active interest in Panama's politics have praised the United States for doing this. And surprising in some cases. And basically, people are just deadly serious about this whole thing. We want more information. We want the U.S. to explain in detail what it is they're talking about. We know about President Martinelli, what about President Varela, and so on. Folks, I am not judging these men. That case is wide open. It's still going on. It's an appeal. It's one thing or another. All these things going on. So many people involved. I'm not going to sit around and talk about it and suggest to you that I think these gentlemen are guilty of anything. I don't know, and it's not my business. It's the business of the Panamanian legal system, which in the last year or two has been very active in ways that had not been in the past. I might add that during this period, too, now 5 of our 9 Supreme Court justices are women, and the Chief Justice is a woman, and she's very good at what she does. You couldn't help but get the feeling when she took office that this was going to be different. So, maybe it's for other reasons. The key point is this is that kind of period when the corruption is not the low-level stuff, it's the huge stuff at the top. And that is being confronted head on. And there's no rioting in the streets, there's no bloodshed. I mean, we don't do things like that, we take it to court. It is in court, and people are expecting that it will be done properly. And if they're guilty, that they're guilty as charged and they're sentenced and so forth. Well, we'll see. I mean, again, this is a decision that's best left to the Panamanian people themselves. But I know that you don't get to a point where you've eliminated the large-scale, or at least greatly reduced large-scale corruption, until after you've had this sort of shocking public display and people say enough is enough, and that's put their foot down. And they have reached a level here in education and background and knowledge and so forth of what's going on, that they know what's going on far better than you may think they do. Panamanians, on the whole, are quite well informed. Maybe inaccurately in some instances and so on, but that's nothing new. They are nonetheless quite well informed, and they do live in a democracy, and they're pleased to do that. So it is open to them. You will hear about it. It's embarrassing to the country as a whole. I think that's been stressed by several. As President Cortez has said, we don't like hearing it, but we hear it. Basically, it's not a good paraphrase, but close. And everyone's uncomfortable. See? Because for him, President Cortez is a completely different political party. So these are all happen to be people from 3 different political parties, so it gets a little complicated. It's okay. It's not going to be trouble that will in any way interfere with your life, okay? Or your activities here. You won't even know what probably is going on unless you make a business of reading the local newspapers, because it's in there practically every day. We've been following this particular situation for a long time. It seems like forever. It's been a long time. And it's tens of thousands of pages of testimony. There's so much in this thing. It's just mind-boggling. But they're working their way through it. So, and decisions are being made and so on. That is that, and if you do hear about it, it's okay. We all are 100% aware of what's going on, and I am great confidence in the Panamanian people and the system here, and now many of the courts and how they're dealing with things. I'm impressed, and so be it. And may the innocent be found innocent, may the guilty be found guilty, and that just pretty much boils it down. Okay, let me check now. I just wanted to check and see how long this has gone on. I think it's enough, and I'm going to leave with that. So those 3, and I'm going to move on to some other things that have been of interest to people, and I think might be of interest to you too for the next one, which will also, I hope, be a reasonable length. Thank you for stopping by. I'll be back soon, and as I say, I'll be putting a link into the other one if it's up by the time you get to see this one. See ya.